everyone. Thanks so much for joining me. My name is Catherine from Keras, and in this video, I am interviewing one of our Keras coaches, Suman. Suman has a background as an engineering manager at Amazon for 7 years, and he specializes in helping you prep for management and design related interviews. In this video, we cover what a design interview is and the 2 categories of questions you want to ask the interviewer. We also talk about Suman's tips for answering a common management-related question and why your interview doesn't end at the Q&A. So let's go ahead and get started. So Suman, thanks so much for being here today with us. You have had an experience of working in Amazon. Can you tell us a little bit about your career journey and how you got there?
Definitely. So as part of Amazon, I joined as an engineer and I worked as an engineer for a couple of years. And then as part of the journey, I understood that I get more excited working with people and then coaching and mentoring them as part of the deliverables as well as like projects. And then as a natural curiosity and interest, my manager helped me fuel that up and then go forward. And I got naturally converted into a manager. And then I worked with Amazon for like a little over 4 years as a manager and then shifted over to different companies. It's a great journey. The scope of responsibilities dramatically change as you move from an IC to manager. And especially as a manager, like a lot of things you need to be cognizant about, like especially when you're talking to your stakeholders as well as business partners, like how are you able to keep them up to speed on what's going on. At the same time, like you want to make sure that you're not overloading with them with the information, but also at the same time, you're not like giving only mediocre responses like we are working on or it's going on. So learning that balance was a little challenging in the beginning. But as I went forward in the journey, I could understand like, okay, what is an appropriate response for the situation? And also how much of detail is sufficient for that so that the partners or the stakeholders can take it forward and then either digest it or cascade it forward to the customers.
Yeah, so it sounds like it's more about being good with your social skills or your communication skills.
That's true. Yeah. That's one part of it, but also the other important part is like, as an engineering leader, how are you able to work with your team? And then what are the opportunities you are able to identify and then ensure that you're providing those for the engineers or the team members appropriately. That's a very, very important one. Like Amazon is always blessed with like state-of-the-art talent and people have so much of passion and interest to do a lot of things. As a leader, it's my duty and every leader's duty is to identify those and then always maximize return on investment. And ROI can be misleading sometimes, but in this case, like you can apply in anywhere. Like if an engineer is spending, let's say 3 months of effort, like what is the return on investment for that engineer? Like what is the new learning? What did they accomplish? It's not just the business return on investment, but also like from the individual's bandwidth, individual effort as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that, so your specialty is in design interviewing, and I actually don't know anything about that. So I'm really curious. So I heard quite a bit about like coding specifically, and I've also heard about behavioral interviews, but what exactly is the design interview? And can you share with us a little bit about that?
Definitely. So right now, as part of every organization moving into cloud-based solutions and then offloading all their infrastructure efforts and system maintenance efforts into a cloud, everybody is looking forward. How are you able to envision a particular problem or situation given to you and then able to design a system, come up with solutions. And the important thing is like, in a 45 minutes to 1 hour, if the interviewer asks like, okay, design Facebook, you cannot build a state-of-the-art Facebook in 45 minutes. Come on.
Right.
So the important thing is like, are you able to understand or at least establish what are the requirements clearly? And then are you able to design the solution according to that? So the one interviewer could be looking forward for newsfeed generation. Another interviewer is looking forward for building a network graph of people, like suggesting who you should be being friend or otherwise like connecting and stuff like that. So there are a bunch of different ways the interviewer might be looking. So the key part is like, especially how are you able to narrow down the requirements into one specific set and able to come up with a design which will cater to all of those needs.
Okay, so can you give us like an example of, a question that might have been asked in an interview before? Because, you said on one hand, 45 minutes is not enough to like design an entire new Facebook, for example, or social media platform, but they might ask you like a more specific question, like a news feed or, like a graph or something like that. So yeah, can you give us like a specific example of a question that's been asked?
Definitely. So one of this question is basically a lot of people are now started trading stocks on the platform like Robinhood, for example.
Okay.
There can be a question, let's say, design Robinhood. Now,
okay.
Under the hood, like there are so many different features of that. Now you cannot just squeeze in everything and then put it in. So
Right.
let's say you want to ask probing questions, understand specific requirements. Like, what is this interviewer looking for? Is it like just displaying the list of stock options and then ability to place orders? And even in the orders also, there is a immediate order like market order and then limit orders. Now the catch here is like for immediate order, it's like a request response model you need to build. But for limit order, you have to build something like a asynchronous process. And it's kind of a batch or some kind of a lateral process which happens. It cannot be together. Like you cannot hold the request until that limit order is processed. So
right.
now as a candidate, are you able to understand these intricacies and able to dissect that and then specify like, okay, what is the part you want me to focus upon and negotiate with that interviewer and say like, okay, if the interviewer is expecting everything to be built, it is not practical. And also generally a lot of interviewers expect is like for senior engineers and senior leaders, mainly the expectation is like, are you able to understand and narrow down the scope to a minimal viable product? Think about it in that way, right?
Oh,
and
that's
then,
great. Yeah. So basically you don't want to just jump in. Like they ask you design a new Robinhood. You don't want to just jump in and try to come up with a solution based on your own preconceived notions. You want to actually push back. And you said negotiate with the interview. I really like that negotiate with.
Okay. So the key thing is like, let's say I just jumped in and solved it. I might have solved something, but interviewer might not be looking for that. So at the end, I mean, the candidate is at a loss, unfortunately.
Right.
So that's why you want to make sure that spend that first 5 minutes or so to make sure that you and the interviewer are on the same page. Ensure that what are they expecting? And also there could be a lot of other features, like whenever an order is executed, you send a notification. If it is not fulfilled, send another notification. And also there could be some other things like, let's say, what if a stock split happens? What do you do with the current things? And our stock mergers happens and then stock delisted and bunch of other things can be happening. And the other important thing, some interviewers will be looking at, like for high scale systems, right, what are the kind of levers are you able to put for operational management? Mm-hmm. Now, recently there was a situation where like a lot of meme stocks were actually being put up and a lot of people were just buying left and right. Now Robinhood had to stop purchase of stocks and then which are even in their limit orders or whatever. So that means like you need to think ahead and then have tools. And now if you ask me like, okay, how much of you can squeeze in? There's no right or wrong answer. So that's why you have to negotiate in the beginning. Make sure that you understand what is within the scope of this requirement, what is out of the scope, and ensure that you focus on those things.
Okay, so it sounds like the interview, it's not 45 minutes of sharing a solution. It's a good chunk of the beginning is just refining what the question is and what are the requirements. And then exactly, the next part of it is essentially, explaining how you would do the solution. And it's all about just helping a person understand how you would think and how you're actually asking more qualifying questions to make sure you're designing something that an actual end user might actually need as well.
Exactly. That's an important thing. And depending upon the situation, like you might be able to get an idea, okay, out of 20 different requirements. I'm just hypothesizing a bit high. Yeah. But let's say there are 20 different things to be done. You won't have time for all of them. Like let's say you anchored on 5 of them, but you still have an idea like, okay, oh, there are additional things you might have to keep in mind so that the system should be flexible. Otherwise, like there are certain breakdown you can do. You did not do it exactly, but you can say like, right now, order execution and notification can be together because of the nature of it. But later you can separate them out into individual ones so that it can scale accordingly. So those are the kind of things you can just utter it. It speaks quite a bit for the interviewer.
Yeah. And I know one of the things that we were talking about beforehand was about having a clear vision and mission.
Correct.
So I know that that's another element that you're really passionate about when it comes to this interview process. So can you explain with us, like, what do you mean by vision and mission, and how can an interviewee show that? Yeah, go into that.
Yeah, it's quite important one, and especially for engineering leaders like engineering managers, senior managers, and also principal engineers. This is an important question, and you should be able to showcase what is your thought process. Are you just anchoring on the requirements or the given question which is given, or otherwise, like, are you able to think beyond the scope of it? Right? Mm-hmm. Here, I can tell you an example of like recently I was talking to one candidate who was preparing for Prime Air. And that's actually a novel solution where we are talking about like drones are being used for shipping the packages and delivering. Now, if you are the one who is an engineering manager or senior manager or principal engineer, oh, that's exciting. Let's build a solution and stuff like that. Like if you're jumping into action, which is fine, but you should be able to take a step back and then ask relevant questions. Now, how is this going to be evolving in the future? Are you expecting that one drone would be delivering like more than one package at the same time? And if let's say if it's same vicinity, there are packages are there, like how is the scheduling should be? Is it like one drone, one package, one location, or one drone, multiple package within like a specific radius? Now, those are important things to think through so that you are able to come up with a design. And also you're able to come up with an architecture which can scale in the future, right? So that's where it's important to talk about this vision. And how I look forward is like two sets of things. One is the product vision, how is the product is going to evolve. And the second one is engineering vision. Okay. Now, engineering vision side of it is like, how are you able to envision this particular space such a way that like it can evolve in the future and it can reciprocate what product is looking forward.
Yes, I'm really glad that we have basically kind of two categories of questions that a candidate needs to be asking about. So one is about the product side, the product vision, and then the other one is about the engineering side. Are there any questions that a person can prep for no matter what question they get asked or no matter what they're asked to design, or is it really just case by case?
Yeah, so one simple thing is like, whatever the question is, like ask them, what is the impact? Like if the interviewer is asking for, okay, design a Facebook, ask the question like, Facebook is already there. Why do you want me to build? Right? Yeah. A simple question, but it can give you a lot of good perspective. Like interviewer might say like, okay, we want to eliminate all the shortcomings of Facebook. We want to focus on one specific aspect of Facebook, which it was not able to fulfill. Right? So then you will get more clarity. Right? Okay. In the case of Prime Air as well, like scheduling with human, human labor compared to that, if you have machines, you can actually schedule more easily. It can be more agile, and also you can actually deliver much more than what we are doing. So those are the kind of things. Then your design is also anchoring on those points.
Okay, that's great. So I really like the fact that just asking what is the impact, no matter what you're getting asked to design, if you can say what is the impact, that is a broad enough question where you can really get a lot of details and information, and you can also ask follow-up questions too.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. So, and also a lot of interviewers look for like not just open-ended questions, and continuously you cannot shift the interview, like you can't interview the interviewer. So basically you can ask a couple of questions and then also share your thought process. Oh, I am thinking in this way. I might be, maybe I'm thinking very sideways, but this is what I am expecting. This is how I believe that it can evolve. Like that is where as a candidate, you're sharing your thought process clearly. You're not just asking all the questions from the interviewer and then just saying that, okay, I understand, but interviewer won't get anything out of it.
Yeah, that's something I've heard quite a bit is that these interviews are actually a dialogue and it's a conversation. So yeah, you don't want to just hear the question and then go into your own thoughts and be very quiet for 10 minutes thinking of your answer and then explain it later, but try to explain, what you're thinking verbally to the interviewer so that they understand your thought process. It's really important.
Exactly. That's a very important thing. And also ask them for what is in scope, what is out of scope, as well as like in the vision as well. Like you can't solve everything under the sun, right? So basically you have to specify some limits and then say like, okay, these are the kind of specific aspects I am anchoring on. I'm taking it as I was saying, MVP, but also I have a general understanding how this will go forward.
Okay, I love that. So what is the impact? What are the limits? Try to create something so you can focus. And I also like that other word that you use is anchor. Try to anchor what your focus is on. Exactly. Okay, so yeah, I know another thing that we were talking about beforehand was about getting your team over a challenging situation. So I know that was another thing that you found that was really important. And I'm assuming that's part of the behavioral interview process. So, correct me if I'm wrong, but can you go into that too?
Yes, definitely. So one of the important thing is like as an engineering manager or senior manager, what you want to do is like you want to balance how much you are involved in the decision making versus how much you are able to empower the team members. Right. And which is a very delicate balance you have to strike. But sometimes you have to jump into action. And when you jump into action, don't want to give a perception that the team was not able to decide. Rather, you want to give them mechanisms to decide. So one of the things which often successfully implemented is useful for me and a lot of other leaders is like data-driven mechanism. Mm-hmm. Let's say we are launching a specific solution for our customers, and then let's say your team came and said like, okay, we do see quite a good number of errors, and then you could say like, okay, then fix them and then we will launch it. But on the other side, like if it is taking you off of the launch plan, and you're not able to adhere to that timeline, then you might want to step in a little more deeper, understand like, okay, what are the different challenges they are talking about? And then data-driven approach usually works well, because if you're talking about 1% failures versus 20% failures, there's a different mechanisms you need to put in. If it is a 1% failure, then you might want to negotiate with your product manager or product owner saying that, okay, this is what we see. Yes, some customers might suffer a little bit in this transition, but it may be worthwhile to take that step. I mean, be bold in some situations, but at the same time, like it's a calculated risk.
Yeah. Do you have any stories about that? Like, do you have a story to share or something that's specific related to this example that you just gave?
Yeah, definitely. So we were talking about like, we were building a solution, which is asynchronous processing. So what we had to do is like identify how to break down the overall workflow. And then instead of processing the entire workflow from top to bottom, what we decided is like, we will only do the user visible portion in a request response manner, and rest of the whole workflow in offline model. Mm-hmm. But now this open up different challenges, because what if the customer is actually doing 2 requests simultaneously? What if some other things are coming up? Then there were solutions as well, like where you can use SQS, where like it can have dedupe logic automatically built in, and bunch of other technological solutions which came in. But everything has 2 sides. So now the team can actually continue forward and then try to find the best solution. You at one point you have to decide that, okay, it's sufficient information. Maybe this is extremely rare scenario that can happen, but when it happens, we can actually just fail the transaction and the customer can retry. And if you are talking about 1 in a million situation, it's okay to take that approach. But if you're talking about 1 in 100 situation, yes, you have to fix that. Right. So that's where it's a little situation which have happened, like where my team was thinking, okay, if at all this fails, how do we capture those failures? How do we make sure that the retries are happening and few other things. Now, I mean, the team has brought up like another component and again another component as a backup of backup and trying to put a different dependencies together. As a result, like for an extremely rare scenario, you're actually building a lot of other moving pieces. Now you have to build all the operational logic for that and ensure that you have tooling and also maintenance and on-call and operation efforts will increase. So the suggestion which I gave is like, okay, think about this, like what is the impact of this particular thing? And then are there any other ways to identify instead of like putting 4 different components and then trying to loop them in? Then the team took a step back and understood, and with the current like 2 different components which are there, they were able to introduce a state management within that component with very small change. And what we understood is like, as I was saying, 1 in a million situation where it can actually transfer from like completed, instead of completed, it will go to failed. And we can have a daily job, which will actually just scrape through all of them and then retry, which is a very simple mechanism, and it's easy to maintain, and it doesn't add any additional load or additional cost for the system.
Yeah. So this kind of question then about like what kind of challenge have you had with the team, and how did you motivate people, or how did you carry your team through? Is that a very common question, especially for design-oriented interviews?
It's not for design, it's mostly for the behavioral interview, and also engineering leadership is the specific one where like the interviewer want to understand like how as a leader you work with the rest of the team, right?
Okay.
You want to be a catalyst for the solution, but not the only, so you are the only one who is providing solution. So that's where the a thin line between you being everywhere versus you helping people to get over a situation, right? The other important thing is like when you're responding for these kind of things, you always want to follow a specific model called STAR approach. STAR is basically situation, task, action, and result. Now, just now, whatever I explained, like I was telling you a little bit, not in detail about situation, like we had a synchronous process as a result, like customer was actually suffering for the delays. Now we want to separate it out. I gave a little bit of situation, a background, and then I went forward with what is the action, what are the different things, and at the end, what is the result of it, like 1 in a million where we are able to do it, and then it auto recovered by itself. As a result, like we have limited components, limited operational overhead, and the system is self-correcting every day. So basically you want to structure it, not just uttering situation, action, result, but take it in the flow and then explain it step by step so that the interviewer will be able to understand. And the other important thing is like try to structure your response within 3 to 4 minutes at the max.
Okay.
Because if you're going too much, like almost 8-9 minutes, there is a chance that interviewer might tune off, or you are not able to convey what is the essential point in this particular response.
Okay. Okay, so trying to structure your responses for 3 to 4 minutes, that sounds like a really good idea. And I guess people can actually maybe time themselves to even try and make sure that they're giving, a good response there. Yeah. And have you ever had an experience where you've interviewed someone who you felt would be a good fit, but because they weren't really answering the questions correctly, or not correctly, but they weren't really giving enough information in their interviews that, it was hard to pass them? Have you ever had a situation like that?
Yes, unfortunately, I had that situations, and I had to basically say, this candidate is not a good fit because they might be having good ideas and good thoughts, but if they are not able to convey them clearly, it's more about like tune your narration based on your audience, right? So that's a very important one. And if you're not able to structure your thoughts and then share within 3 to 4 minutes, it's harder for the audience to follow that. That's the first thing. And the second thing is like one advice to the candidates is whenever you're talking in the STAR format or any different responses, depending upon the question, talk about your hypothetical your beliefs in general, but also try to squeeze in a short example. And if you feel that, okay, it's going beyond 4 minutes or beyond 5 minutes, but you still have something to talk, you can ask a probing question to a follow-up question to the interviewer. Like, I do have a good detail on this. Like, do you want me to elaborate? And sometimes interviewer might say like, okay, yeah, tell me about it. So you're not letting them tune out, rather you're bringing them back into conversation. So that's an important one. And with the virtual interviews, the one blessing is like, as soon as you complete a question, I just take a look at my clock and then see like, okay, oh, it's around like this time. And then I add like a couple of minutes and then just take a look at that once in a while. And with practice, you wouldn't even notice that you're doing, but automatically your brain tunes into that and you're able to balance it out.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, so practicing kind of like with a timer, with a clock, and then also making sure that if you do feel you're going to go over the time, you can involve the interviewer in the process and say, hey, can I explain more on this? I have some more ideas. Yeah, and then just kind of keep them engaged in that way. That's really great advice. Yeah, so I feel like we've heard so many really great pieces from you. We've heard a couple of really common questions that get asked, especially if you're doing behavioral interviewing or design related interviewing for engineering. And then also some really great ways of how you can structure your response with the STAR method. So making sure that you have a situation, then the actual tasks that happened, and also what kind of result happened at the end. So that really paints a really good scope and a good picture. Is there anything else that you want to share with viewers, and maybe any personal story that you had that would be interesting to us?
Definitely. So one of the things is like, as part of the interviewing, it's the interview doesn't end when the interviewer says like, okay, do you have any questions for me? Actually, the interview continues until you hang up the call. So keep that in mind. Always be prepared with relevant questions to the interviewers. So don't just ask a cookie cutter question like, okay, what is the team like and what are the responsibilities? Because definitely it's good question, but it doesn't tell about you, or it doesn't show that what's the level of interest you're looking at. Ask specific questions. Like, for example, recently I was interviewing and I myself was attending an interview, and then I mentioned that like, okay, what does this organization has something key differential factors with the competitors? Mm-hmm. Now you're actually asking them very, very intriguing questions, insightful questions, which is very important. And when I was talking to a principal engineer, what I asked him is like, okay, tell me a situation where like you're actually heavily involved in the design and where you're able to accomplish something in the recent past. It's not a full length of interview, but they will be passionate about, oh, I actually did this particular thing and I was able to build a solution with like 10,000 requests per second and all the stuff. Like, you get a good sense of like, okay, what kind of a system or what kind of a team you're getting into.
Yeah, so it helps you understand a little bit more too about the organization, about the projects that they're working on, beyond just saying, okay, tell us about your team.
Yeah. So actually,
there was the other tip that you had right before that. I'm really curious to know. So you said, keep in mind that the interview doesn't end with the Q&A, like it ends just beyond that. So what do you mean by that? Like, what has happened that has prompted you to say that as a good piece of advice?
So the thing is like, for senior leaders, if you're asking general cookie cutter questions, the growth potential might not be seen by the interviewers. Maybe you did really well in the interviews. Like, if let's say suppose you're on the fence between a manager and senior manager, okay, and you're being interviewed for senior manager. Now, until the call is cut, you want to ensure that you are in that interviewing mode. You have to continue to showcase your ability to be a senior manager. If you're asking general question like, okay, oh, what is the product like? What are the projects like? And which is fine, but the thing is like, it doesn't show the clear growth potential. As I was saying, like, okay, what is the differentiating factor from our leaders, our competitors?
I see.
And then also the other questions for engineering managers or so, like ask them like, what are the next year goals look like? What are the top goals for the next year? Is it more about like re-architecting and scaling up or adding new features? Then if it is a product manager you're working with, then ask them about like, okay, what do they see a product vision for that particular one?
Yeah, so really take advantage of the Q&A time to really to ask questions that are from the position of the role that you might be getting into. So exactly. That's another element too. Okay, yeah, that's a really great piece of advice. Okay, well, Suman, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. And I'm sure a lot of people who are listening have been taking notes, just like I have, of a few of the things, especially for the design part of the interview. So yeah, thanks so much.
Thank you, Catherine. This is a good opportunity. Thank you very much for considering me.
Thanks so much for listening. If you want to get in touch with Suman, then head on over to keras.io, where you can schedule a free 15-minute chat with him. We put all of the links below this video. Make sure you like and subscribe, and we'll catch you in the next one.